Good afternoon, and congratulations to you, our graduates, to your families, partners, friends, and colleagues, to administrators, faculty, and staff, and to all whose efforts have brought us to this significant milestone in your lives and in the history of Boston University's School of Theology. We thank God that we can gather in Marsh Chapel on this gorgeous day to celebrate not only your academic achievements, but also every facet of your growth during your time here. Whatever your ages, you've been put through your paces pursuing the degrees you received this weekend. And in the process, you've put us through our paces too. We have all grown with and because of you. The book of Proverbs is well suited to this occasion because it summons us to the quest for wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Verse 1 attributes its contents to Solomon, but the scroll contains the wisdom of generations of Israelites and Judeans and was shaped over centuries by the sages and scribes who coined, adopted, adapted, and compiled its teachings. A few of its features bear noting. First, it makes no claim to divine inspiration. In fact, it neither quotes God nor addresses Israel's deity directly. Second, it nowhere refers to ancient Israel's most sacred traditions, including the Davidic covenant and Mosaic law. The late Dr. Michael Fox tells us that it never played a role in ancient Israel's ritual life in either temple or synagogue. Proverbs offers ideals and guidelines, not laws and prophecies. Third, it addresses mostly secular matters. To be sure, it refers to God and what pleases God, and variations of its motto, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," lend a religious aura to the entire book. But it speaks primarily of everyday challenges, avoiding life's potential pitfalls, negotiating relationships with family, friends, and adversaries, and cultivating the virtues that lead to harmony, morality, and dignity. Fourth, its worldview is elitist. Yes, a poor, wise person is better than a rich, foolish one. But the sages largely presuppose a well-heeled audience. And fifth, Proverbs is immersed in the patriarchal ideology of its age. Chapters 1 through 9 largely cast as a father's instructions to his son, repeatedly warn against consorting with married women who appear as all too eager to lead their victims to death's door. 19th century British journalist and author John Wade observed that the world's adages do a singular injustice to the fair sex. And the same is true of Tanakh sayings, too. Israelite women surely coined proverbs that encapsulated their insights, but were either ignored or overlooked by the book's compilers. While sayings about women express the biases of the men who created and cherry-picked them. True, Proverbs 31 praises the ideal wife, but it's clear that she is steadfastly working her way into an early grave. In short, we must take the book's gender-related ideology with the proverbial grain of salt. That said, Proverbs pursues a worthy goal, for it everywhere aims to imbue its audiences not only with knowledge, but also, and especially, with the personal attributes and attitudes that can guide their behavior for years to come. The sages clearly believed that early exposure to wisdom teachings is essential for character formation. But the book is far from teen lit. To the contrary, its prologue promises that the wise, hearing its teachings, will gain even more wisdom. In short, becoming wise is a lifelong endeavor, requiring constant vigilance, since even the sages can slip through wisdom's fingers if they lapse into arrogance and complacency. Throughout the work, its authors go to any lengths to present the way of wisdom as smooth, unswerving, desirable above all things, and richly rewarding. In multiple passages, they personify chokmah, the feminine Hebrew noun for wisdom, as a woman, and a seductress at that, who walks the streets of her town, entices passers-by, and like any polished self-promoter, presents her wares in the best possible light. Quote, "Mine are counsel and resourcefulness. I am understanding. Courage is mine. Through me kings reign and royals declare just laws. Those who love me, I love. And those who seek me will find me. Riches and honor belong to me. Enduring wealth and success. My fruit is better than gold, fine gold, and my produce better than choice silver." What a sales pitch. Who wouldn't choose to be wise? But for all their words, the sage's task is harder than a cursory reading of the book suggests. Obtaining wisdom demands more than hearing the parental instructions and poems in praise of wisdom's virtues that fill chapters 1 through 9. It certainly entails more than memorizing the hundreds of sayings compiled, often in no discernible order, in Proverbs 10 through 29. Yes, knowledge is essential. And yes, the more we learn about something, the more deeply we can understand it. That's true, isn't it, graduates? But wisdom, not so fast. For all their lofty aspirations, ancient Israel's sages and scribes hamper as well as help their efforts in at least two ways. First, with their glowing promises of wisdom's rewards, wealth, honor, success, they risk presenting a skewed perspective on what life spent in its pursuit can be like. Dr. Fox acknowledges the sages' biases. The sayings in Proverbs are drawn from different social groups, he observes, but they must meet the redactors, not the folks' notion of wisdom. The book's authors and editors selected sayings that supported the values already inherent in their hierarchical worldview, while excluding those that did not. To illustrate his point, Fox singles out a proverb cited in Ezekiel 18 and Jeremiah 21, quote, "Parents eat sour grapes, but children's teeth are set on edge." This saying, with its assertion that one generation suffers the consequences of its predecessor's sins, is supported by other biblical texts, including the Ten Commandments, where we read, "I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and fourth generations of those who reject me," close quote. But the saying would not have qualified as wisdom by the book of Proverbs standards because it violates the sages' bedrock belief in a divinely maintained moral balance between deed and consequence, such that people are punished or rewarded based solely on their own attitudes and actions. This understanding of how God administers justice also has its scriptural supports. Nevertheless, rejecting the sour grape saying's truth claim is unwise, I think, since we all know that one generation's choices can affect the formation, experience, and actions of the next. Think, for example, of what our children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews will endure on account of what we and our predecessors have done to planet Earth. If the sages excluded the sour grapes adage from Proverbs because it undermined their worldview, then they also turned their backs on the fundamental reality of human existence. To be sure, Fox concedes, Proverbs also contains what he calls anomaly sayings. Proverbs that appear to concede violations of the proper order without explicit assurances of resolution. One thinks of Proverbs 13:23, the powerful person devours the tillage of the poor, and some people are swept away without justice. But such sayings were not problematic, Fox insists, because the sages believed that their understanding of justice was axiomatic and inviolable, and any apparent violation must be illusory or temporary. I admire the sages' courage of their convictions. But I also think that Dr. John Collins better explains the inclusion of such sayings. They appear, he says, because they acknowledge what the sages themselves knew all too well: the limits of human wisdom and the uncertainties of life. Proverbs 19:21 reminds us that many designs are in a person's mind. I bet you have some designs in your mind right now, don't you? But it is the Lord's plan that is accomplished. While Proverbs 20:24 concedes a person's steps are determined by the Lord, what do humans know about their own way? In short, wisdom lies not only in cultivating our character, but also in acknowledging our limits. The fear of the Lord, that is the awe-filled recognition that the Lord is God and not human, is the beginning of wisdom, but we can never encompass it completely. And for that reason, humility is the order of the day. A second obstacle to the sages' agenda is that the sayings compiled in Proverbs 10 through 29 appear without examples of their potential use in social interactions. This format is not surprising. As anthropologist Jack Goody observes, the first thing the learned did with Proverbs was to make lists of them. And the practice of compiling sayings already appears in Sumerian proverb collections from the 3rd millennium BCE. Take note, this may be the last time that you hear about Sumerian literature. One might think that the literary settings in which sayings appear is inconsequential. After all, any proverb can be placed in a collection. And in theory, any proverb in a collection can be quoted. But as scholar Stephen Shapin reminds us, the act of compiling, arranging, inspecting, and publishing sayings transforms them. If we focus solely on isolated sayings, we risk mistaking proverbial relativism for logical positivism. That is the belief, the assumption that there is an easily accessible standard of external reality out there against which we can measure our utterances. Even big-name scholars occasionally fall into this trap when they state that biblical wisdom sayings wish to establish something unquestionably valid, and that Proverbs embody truth. Proverbial relativism stands out most starkly when we come across juxtaposed, contradictory sayings. In Proverbs 26:4, for example, we read, "Do not answer dullards in accord with their folly, else you will become like them." Yet the very next verse advises, "Answer dullards in accord with their folly, else they will think themselves wise." Their scriptural status has likely shielded these two sayings from at least some criticism, but other contradictory proverbs have not fared as well. In Tudor and Stuart England, Chapin writes, humanists like to play with so-called crossed proverbs, assembling sayings that clashed with each other to highlight the inadequacy of the common people's way of thinking. For every apparently wise look before you leap, there is an equally valued and opposite, he who hesitates is lost. How could rational persons find the slightest value in such statements when elementary logic teaches us that a proposition cannot be true if the opposite is also true? Chapin shows, however, that this problem is more apparent than real. The contradictions that seem so evident when proverbs are treated as isolated propositions vanish like smoke when they are interpreted as utterances in specific situations. People quote proverbs in particular situations to express judgments about how to act properly in them and to commend their judgments to others. True wisdom lies in our ability to discern when to leap and when to hesitate. Richard Honeck tells us that learning how to select and deploy sayings strategically requires not only multiple types of intelligence, but also creativity, talent, and social skills. And proverb usage is still prized in much of today's world. Among the Haya of Tanzania, for example, people urge co-workers to persevere in lengthy tasks by reminding them that one straw finishes the honey. They urge their offspring to slow down and speak clearly by quoting, "The cow that goes slowly drinks well." But proverbs have a checkered history in the West. In the 16th century, Erasmus could write, to interweave adages deftly and appropriately is to make the language as a whole glitter with sparkles from classical antiquity, please us with the colors of the art of rhetoric, and gleam with jewel-like words of wisdom. By the 18th century, however, author and dramatist Edward Young was warning fellow writers to shun inelegant and obsolete sayings tarnished by passing through the mouths of the vulgar, to reverence themselves, and to trust their own genius, that God within. With the West emphasis on individualism, proverbs, like old gray mares, ain't what they used to be. That's not to say that we no longer cite them. We do. Most English speakers know that many hands make light work. They advise colleagues to strike while the iron is hot and caution children that honesty is the best policy. Nevertheless, and I want you to hear this, I am not urging you to spend this summer studying scores of sayings, biblical or otherwise. My point is something different. That is, knowing proverbs is one thing, but knowing how to use them is something different. When I was 8 years old, I was once, my grandfather taught me how to navigate the pieces on a chessboard. I must have felt proud of what I'd learned, because when we were done, I announced to my mother, "Now I know how to play chess." Mom isn't one to downplay her daughter's achievements, but she suggested to me gently that there's more to playing chess than learning how its pieces move. I felt crestfallen at the time, but I soon realized how right she was. I knew the barest basics of chess, but I hadn't the slightest idea how to play the game. Wisdom is like that. Whatever its form of expression, it entails all the knowledge and understanding we can muster, but also and especially the ability to define one's situation and discern how best to respond to it. And despite the sage's assurances, the way of wisdom is not always smooth. Sometimes each of two options is possible, but both have their pluses and minuses. Other times, we find ourselves in circumstances we cannot see our way through. And occasionally, the wisest choice seems clear, but it isn't what we really want to do, darn it. Cultivating wisdom can also require us to act in ways we'd rather not, like admitting our mistakes, an increasingly rare virtue in today's world. Summoning the courage to speak when we fear ridicule and rejection, but also practicing the fine art of listening to those whose expertise and experience differ from our own. According to the book of James, chapter 3, it also requires the willingness to tame our tongues. Not only to speak wisely, which is difficult enough in the heat of the moment, but also to speak our wisdom gently. And frankly, friends, that virtue remains a growing edge for me. For the better part of 40 years, I have quoted Dr. Jonathan Z. Smith's wise words in my classrooms. Smith defined arguing, and he defined it as follows. Arguing is negotiating difference with civility. Civility has always been an endangered species. But in today's world, it's teetering on the edge of extinction. The late, great Harry Orlinsky observed that Amos, the Judean prophet who traveled north to proclaim God's words, blew in, blew off, and blew out. But blowing off in a new work setting or faith community might not be the best strategy if you're hoping not to blow out anytime soon. Our lives are saturated with opportunities to put the wisdom we have already acquired to work. But the challenges awaiting you, our graduates, are especially acute as you leave the School of Theology and enter communities different from those you've negotiated and created here. Your formal classroom training might or might not lie behind you, but your schooling in the ways of wisdom continues. Be gentle with yourself, but rigorous in your resolve to examine your assumptions, to negotiate differences with civility, and to keep a firm grip on your humility. We believe in you. We are excited for you. Congratulations again on your graduation. And to all of us who pursue wisdom, welcome to the next stage in your educations. Thank you.